Thanks so much for being here, and thank you to my esteemed panelists for sharing this stage with me. Happy to be here as part of Benzinga. Now, to my left here, we have the man that needs no introduction himself, Zappy. We've got Nadav Aschner, who's a partner at Rodman Law. And then we have Joseph Mays, who's the program director of the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative from the Chacruna Institute. Welcome, you guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by asking each of you about your background when it comes to providing access to psilocybin in your communities and beyond, and the barriers that you've experienced within your jurisdictions and how you've helped patients or clients overcome them.
Yeah, I'm going to start by saying that I'm wearing the Mind Army jacket right now. This is a 501c3. We're dedicated to fighting for the right to pursue happiness. And we believe it's your inalienable right to go inside your own mind for answers and healing. So for me, I've taken the approach that since doctors don't really even know about nutrition, which could solve 80% of their problems, why would I listen to them about psychedelics that they don't know about? And so the Mind Army is not going to sit here in 2023 and hear that alcohol is good, tobacco is good, psilocybin's bad. We're just not living in that paradigm. And so we are advocating for people to access psilocybin microdosing as, you know, a replacement to things like antidepressants, to, you know, or to come off of alcohol or these different things. It's just, we have to sort of step forward and say, okay, I trust Johns Hopkins, I trust Rick Doblin from MAPS more than I trust my local internal medicine doctor. And we're just taking that sort of an approach, and we invite everybody to just be, you know, civilly disobedient, because it doesn't make any sense, and we're not going to put up with it during a post-pandemic crisis of addiction, depression, suicide. So psilocybin definitely is the answer to mass society having a better mental health in general.
And Nadav, would you like to chime in about how you've helped some clients of yours?
Sure. Nadav Aschner, partner of the Rodman Law Group. Thank you, Benzinga and Farrell, everyone, for having us here. I think I approach things a little bit different than my colleagues here. You know, I have some background in criminal defense, so I have seen sort of the law enforcement side of this thing in the past, and the crackdown on what is otherwise a powerful and healing set of substances. Currently, now that there are legal mechanisms to cultivate and not sell, but transport or transfer, deliver these substances in Oregon and Colorado and Quebec, we're starting to see groups that are getting in on the ground floor and taking the opportunity to provide medicine that has an incredibly powerful and healing effect that until now has been stigmatized in the worst kind of way. And so we are helping these groups get in and understand, you know, what can you do lawfully? What are what is a business model that doesn't fly right in the face of the legislation that is passed? And how do we do this in a responsible way to progress an industry that needs to exist without really setting the whole industry back 50 years?
I think that's a great segue for Joseph here. You've done some great work with the Chacruna Institute, and I'd love to hear more about how that's benefited your community when it comes to access to psilocybin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as you said, I work for a nonprofit that specializes in public education, and I'm an anthropologist and an ethnobotanist by trade, and my primary role is to partner with indigenous communities on their terms and try to get some of the investment and interest and energy that's going into the psychedelics industry, into the promise of psilocybin-assisted therapy to go back to the communities and really support where this medicine came from. I've spent some time working with different training programs in Oregon and in Colorado, therapists who have been training to try and integrate psilocybin into their therapeutic practice. And I think it's really clear that everyone involved is really interested in finding a way to give back to the community, to be in reciprocity or in right relationship with where this medicine comes from, where this tradition and knowledge comes from, because no matter what you're working with, even if you're working with synthetic psilocybin, psychedelic science as a field wouldn't exist without indigenous people and indigenous communities. Aldous Huxley and Abraham Hoffer, when they coined psychedelic, they were sitting in a Native American church ceremony. And so there's really no escaping that continuity. It's pretty clear. And people are asking, how do we give back and how do we integrate the lessons of our psychedelic experiences that teach us that we are in relationship, that we are not living in as an individual, atomized and removed from a context. And how do you serve and honor the relationships that you are more aware of now? And I think Chacruna and then the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative is trying to offer one possible avenue for how to direct some of that.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to start with you as well, Joseph, if you don't mind, for this question here, because I'd love to know your opinion on what we could learn from cannabis legalization when it comes to sustainable, responsible growth in this new industry.
Well, I think that's one of the differences with psychedelics is there's a really clear continuity between the struggles of indigenous people and the history of colonialism and then psychedelic medicine. So there's I think a lot of people are asking those questions a lot earlier on now, is like, how do we do this in an ethical way? And with cannabis, the industry is a little bit different. I think that the questions about how to address, people who are still incarcerated, people who have suffered the most from cannabis being illegal, kind of didn't start to get as much attention until after the industry had been around for a long time. So I'm hopeful that with psychedelics, people are really taking a more proactive approach and trying to ask those questions now rather than later, and not have the reciprocity side be an afterthought, because it's so integral to the whole experience and the whole healing potential of psychedelics themselves. I think there's an emphasis on individual healing. There's the one-to-one therapy model. It's very different than maybe where a lot of psychedelics come from and where psilocybin comes from. One of my indigenous partners is the Mazatec community in Mexico, where psilocybin was first introduced to the West, not by open dialogue, but by coercion, and that has caused harm. And I think the potential for healing is never removed from a social context. The healing and illness itself are both things that are social and communal, and they're not individual experiences that are only dealing with personal trauma, but they are about your relationships with other people as well as other communities and non-human beings, your environment, and trying to really identify where you exist within that network of relationships, and then how can you use your energy and your life in a way that serves that, and also keeps in mind the people who are still struggling with having their basic rights respected, let alone the right to use psychedelics, but the right to have land and security and water and territory, and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of tools, Nadav, are there any tools in your toolbox that you have from consulting with your clients on cannabis that you use when they come to you and want to chat about psilocybin?
So I think most importantly, everyone here, everyone on this panel, everyone at this event is at the start of a movement. And I think it's really important, and I think everyone here shares similar values. And I think what's most important in looking back at cannabis over the last decade, the sky isn't falling. The sky hasn't fallen. We're in a position now to take what we've learned and build on it, and create true, sensible drug policy reform. And I think that, I suppose the last question was, what are the building blocks of cannabis? And that's it. As cannabis has proliferated across the country, across the world, you're not seeing underage use increase. You're not seeing, an uptick in vehicle deaths and homicides. So we've got real research that shows that these substances are powerful and useful and have a real healing effect. And so when my clients come in to speak with me, I think that's at the forefront of our discussion. We need to do this right. We need to do this responsibly. We need to do this legally. We need to do this ethically. But you get to take what we've learned over the last decade and build upon it and start showing people, hey, this isn't bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Exactly. And like you said, the sky didn't fall. So,
Mhm.
Zappy, what do you think? Is the sky going to fall, or
no,
are we going to have a revolution?
I thank God for cannabis for laying the foundation for where we are today. I think, people like my mom, who's in her early 80s, she'd always been told, don't do any marijuana or drugs. It'll ruin your brain. And then about 3 years ago, when cannabis became legal in Massachusetts, she started to take edibles, and she was like, wow, this is really good for me. They lied to me for this whole time. So then when I approached her about with psychedelics or mushroom microdosing, she just like popped it in her mouth. She was like, I probably lied about this too. So I think cannabis really laid that foundation. And I want to talk about one of the tools that we have. I think the most interesting thing happening in psychedelics right now is that there's alternative drug delivery happening. I'm part of a company called Psycheceutical, and we have a patent for putting any neuroactive compound at the back of your neck at the base of the hairline. Right there, there's nerves that go directly to the brain. So if you put not psilocybin, because that has to go into your stomach to become psilocin, but if we put psilocin right here on the back of your neck, it's going to go in. You're not going to have a psychedelic experience. You're not going to have dizziness or nausea because you're not going through the body system, but you get the benefit that you're looking for, whether that's relief from PTSD, pain, these different things. So I think the amazing thing is that we didn't know about this because these have been illegal to study, and we just need to have the tools now to deliver without a psychedelic effect, so elderly people and kids can get this access to these healing properties without necessarily having the psychedelic effect. And I think probably, as we're talking about mushrooms here, psilocybin microdosing, it's sub-perceptual, so you can, anyone can approach it. And I think when you have a microdose psilocybin, all of a sudden you're open to a macro dose, you're interested in meditation, all these things. So it's probably going to be psilocybin that really, for the masses, comes out in a microdose and changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And what I do want to ask you, Nadav, I'll throw this one to you, is as you mentioned, we're at the beginning of a revolution. And as we're developing regulations, how can patients that need psilocybin access it in an unregulated market that has no regulations, no licensed cultivators or authorized retailers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And so currently in Colorado, for example, you can cultivate, you can give away, you can donate, you cannot sell. So it's a fantastic question. How does somebody who needs access to this obtain it? Unfortunately, it's a legal gray area, and it's rely on the kindness of strangers. Rely on somebody who wants to provide bona fide harm reduction services. Rely on yourself or your peers, your colleagues, whomever, who might have the ability to grow this stuff for personal use or sharing with friends or people in need. Over time, the legislation does provide for healing centers to sell psilocybin and eventually, hopefully, other substances as well. But we're not going to see, I don't think anytime soon, a traditional dispensary model like we see in cannabis. And so it's a question that's almost impossible to answer today, because we've got Oregon, who finally issued licenses for the first time a week ago. We don't have precedent to see exactly how this will work anywhere else in the world. So we're in a really fun, unique, interesting holding pattern as we wait and see. But the answer for now, unfortunately, is you've got to know someone who's willing to provide it to you lawfully, which means no sales.
Yeah. And perfect follow-up question, Zappy, do you think there will be mushroom dispensaries? Do you think people will be able to go in and buy a consumer packaged product?
I do. I think there's probably going to be something that happens within society, fairly horrific. You can imagine maybe some nuclear exchanges where everybody goes, whoa, what are we doing here? That's going to accelerate the right to try for mental health that's going to just open up in a way that we can't really perceive right now. But what I'm excited about, the Mind Army is involved with a group that has a machine that a lot of people may know. It's called Magical Butter. And it's basically a machine that makes your cannabis into butter with a push of a button. They have a new machine that is a magical mushroom machine that they're going to put out. It's basically AI, watering systems, cameras, everything. You just put the spores in, which they're going to deliver to you because it's not illegal to give spores to somebody. So they deliver you the spores, you put it in this hermetically sealed thing, you push the button, and you have your perfect mushrooms. That means you have medicine, you can pass it out to your family, your friends. Like, this is the pharmacy of the future. And I think if we just, are disruptive in how we think about, what we're entitled to use, that things like this are going to give everybody access to it because it's so easy to grow and to make a lot of it.
Indeed. Maybe one day we'll all become experts in our own little way. Nadav, I'll throw this one to you to start us off. How are current decriminalization practices enabling access?
So there are plenty of people and groups that are cultivating in large quantities. There's a bit of a misconception. Decriminalization is not legalization. Decriminalization does not permit sale. It does not permit possession of massive quantities with intent to distribute or intent to profit in a commercial manner. But we all know that there are groups doing that all over the country. You can walk into a head shop in DC and buy a poster and probably walk out with a couple grams of psilocybin. So the long and short of it is that there is a concerted effort, a directive to law enforcement to look the other way. And so for better or for worse, there is this ability for people who maybe have been doing this underground for many years to come out and do it a little more openly without necessarily risking the same legal ramification as they would have risked just a year ago. So it is not legal, but there is a lot of psilocybin to be found in most states that anyone would think of.
Are you seeing the same patterns in your communities, Joseph, when it comes to people being able to access, through their peers?
Yeah, I think, accessibility is an interesting question. I always have to ask, what are the limits of accessibility when, especially the market doesn't seem to be able to scale access to psilocybin in quite the way that people may have thought initially. I think the services require a lot more care and time and training and hours and cost than is feasible, or it seems like it will work to a lot of investors. And I think, unfortunately, oftentimes people don't really want to invest unless they can see something that can scale. And I love Zappy's description of the psilocin implant to the brainstem, and I can't wait to tell my Mazatec partners about that one. But I wish that there was an implant that could be like an urge to donate money right to the back of the skull. Let me know when one of your partners.
Well, no, I think you're making the point. I think psilocybin probably is that because when you have that psychedelic experience and you emerge with more empathy, you really can solve problems like this. So I think everything is.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I think that the question remains, how to do that in the most meaningful and impactful way. And I think, wherever you are in this space, if you're looking to build a business or an organization or succeed in some way, whether or not you're interested in giving back or finding a way to enact reciprocity, I think you're going to find that your audience is interested, your consumers, your clients, your practitioners, therapists. Everyone is really looking and trying to see, what are you doing about that? And I think that's going to be very salient and pertinent for everyone involved. And that urge to do something with the insights that you've received is real. It's just not always clear how to act on that. And I think that's what, I'm interested in trying to provide, and something that's done in the right way, and on the terms of the people who need support the most, and going towards what they're fighting for.
So that's really interesting because on that social impact component, neither Colorado nor Oregon have implemented a tax on healing centers, therapeutic centers. That might be in the works one day down the road, and the hope would certainly be that if there is a tax on any commercial activity involving psilocybin, psilocin, or future compounds, that unfortunately, to a large degree, you would have to trust legislatures and government to implement that tax and utilize that tax in a useful manner. You look at cannabis, it's taxed astronomically, and where money is being used to quote unquote fund education, it's not necessarily being used in a productive manner. So all of the legislation that I've seen, and there are 4 states with legislation coming on the ballot this year, seem to have some sort of social impact component to it. But unfortunately, or fortunately, there will have to be a way to raise money to pay for these social benefits and social change. And hopefully business owners in this space will feel that sense of requirement as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to know what you guys would say to entrepreneurs as well as regulators, politicians, when it comes to ensuring that access to psilocybin is enjoyed not just by privileged, but accessible to all people equally, particularly those who were harmed by the war on drugs.
Yeah. For me personally, I mean, I would love to see maybe the Native Americans on their reservations be the people who hold the space for people to have these psychedelic experiences, because we're going to have, Las Vegas where you can get addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever. We have to have healing places where you can shake that. And I think that Native Americans naturally could hold space. Obviously, they need it. I would say people need to try these things first, because there's a lot of ketamine clinics. You go there and the doctor and his staff have never done ketamine. And so for you to be able to hold space or really help somebody, you really have to have that direct experience. And so I think that's number one. Number two, what I want to really fight against the mind army is that once we do get legalization, we have to be really vigilant, because a lot of times, like there was this announcement up in Canada where they said psilocybin mushrooms are now legal in Alberta, and everybody was like, yay. And then you read the fine print and it says you have to be with 2 doctors at the time. And it's like, that's ridiculous. It's unnecessary. It's cost prohibitive. And the mind army is not going to stand for that, because it's total bullshit. So, this is what we have to stand up against. And people often say to me, well, maybe Zappy, the FDA just needs more evidence that these aren't, addictive, or that they do have medical benefit. And because that's the definition of a Schedule I drug. So we say back to them, well, if that's the case, then shouldn't cigarettes that have no medical benefit and are highly addictive, shouldn't they be on Schedule I? If they're not, then the whole thing is, ridiculous. And as I'm told, it was the alcohol companies that actually put this whole suppression in place back in the 60s. It wasn't the pharmaceutical companies, because they'll sell anything, but the alcohol companies realized that this was going to disrupt their business on a Friday, Saturday night, that a lot of people probably would want to have this experience. And then things like ibogaine that can break an alcohol addiction, was off the table for them. So I think we just have to, just be really vigilant and assume that every time some breakthrough happens, some other special interest group is going to try to make it so they can grift some money on the side out of it. And it's just classic humanism. But if we get a critical mass of people to go inside and have more empathy, I think we can solve every problem, including that one. So
I agree. Yeah, snaps.
To clients and entrepreneurs, I would say, let's be on the cutting edge together. Let's do this responsibly. To regulators and regulatory agencies, I would say, educate yourselves. Schedule I is an atrocity, and we need sensible drug policy reform, and you are in a position to do it.
Yeah, I would echo what Nadav said, and I think Zappy brought up Native American communities, indigenous communities in the U.S. Being space holders, and I think there are, of course, indigenous people who are involved in facilitation and in serving medicine and working with people outside of their communities or within their communities, and Chacruna really tries to highlight indigenous activists and scholars and practitioners in our work. But I do think that, in my experience, most of the indigenous leaders and groups that I work with and partner with are not really interested in talking about psychedelics, or at least not the Western idea of psychedelics. They're interested primarily in having their land and their human rights respected first. And I think those are really important concerns that come before the promises of the psychedelic industry or psychedelic renaissance, as it's called. And I think I would say to business owners and entrepreneurs, how are you addressing that? Is there a way that you're able to support that with what you're doing? And I think, there are a few answers to that, but the work that I do is one example, and it's really about listening to the concerns and priorities as they've been identified by communities on the ground at the foundation level, to whom so much is owed and from whom so much has been taken. What are their concerns and priorities, and what are the projects that they're working on? And if they're working on something connected to psychedelics, that's something that you can support. But I think you'll find that usually the emphasis is on some of these basic things first, and the promises of psychedelic medicine, as Farrell said, like how can we ensure that they're not only going to be enjoyed by a small subset of people? And yeah, I think the answer isn't always supporting indigenous communities in other countries or regions, but what about wherever your business is based, or wherever you source your materials or your labor, or whoever is working for you at the ground level? How are they being compensated, and how equitable is the distribution of profits and authority and power within your organization? Because what we really need is new structures, and I would love to see the creativity of the people in this space directed towards that, and how can we not only educate and disseminate information, highlight different ideas, hope that people learn and educate themselves and others and change their behavior based on their experiences, but also build things in a different way that puts pressure on the structures and the systems that are much harder to affect just by individual choice or changing hearts and minds. I think we can do both, and I want to see all of the beautiful creativity, the playfulness, the great ideas that come out of this space to also be directed towards some of those harder problems that I think we all have to come together to address.
Absolutely. Like you said, we're all in this together. And so just to cap off this conversation, I'd love to hear, Zappy, what advice would you give to our audience and our followers when it comes to what they can do within their communities to send a message to regulators?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to be really vigilant and just, appreciate the fact that doctors don't know about this, politicians don't know about it. But I think there's things that are coming that are going to be very disruptive for them to get in front of. One of them is frequency and frequency medicine. And digital psychedelics are coming. There's a lot of companies that are already doing very exciting things. I've got a movie that's going to come out called Frequency, The Future of Everything. And it's about how we use frequency. And so there are already patches where they've taken the frequency of psilocin and put it into a crystal structure in a patch that you put onto your skin. And for 48 hours, it'll emit the frequency of psilocin. And it's as if you did a microdose of psilocybin, but you didn't take any substance. And so that's going to be very hard for the government at some point to say, no, you can't put on these headphones and listen to the frequency of LSD or vitamin C. So this is like a very disruptive thing that I think whether, like I saw a picture the other day where there were math teachers in the 1970s protesting calculators. Okay, there's going to be people that want to, get their agenda or their thing going, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that can stop people from going inside themselves, which is where the answers are. And these are just tools. These are, incredible tools that we have to get to. And if they outlaw one thing, we'll go to another. If they don't like the substance, we'll go to frequency. And so it's just, we're the humans and we're the society, so we will do this. And you don't need to worry about whether it's going to happen.
Absolutely. And Nadav, reaching into your toolbox, what advice would you give to our friends and followers when it comes to regulator speak?
I think everyone is here for the same reasons. We want to see this industry grow. We want to see the people that need it have access to it. So I think, to borrow Zappy's word, be vigilant. Consume as much as you can. Read the legislation. It's not fun to read unless you're nerdy like me, but read it. Educate yourselves. Educate the people around you. Tell your parents about it. There's an entire swath of the population that just doesn't know enough. And I think education is our most powerful tool to get people to understand the power behind these substances. So I would just say, be vigilant, be aggressive, be polite, but get the word out.
And finally, Joseph, advice for our friends and followers.
Donate money to Chacruna Institute, the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative. I would say, I think that this advice is really good to just be consuming as much as you can, not drugs. I assume you meant
yes, not drugs.
Yeah, and just really look for information that's grounded and rooted, that isn't just being written by someone who just found out about psychedelics recently or has put in the work. And really, I think this is true for any of these sensitive issues, is the more that you educate yourself, that shows a certain amount of respect for what you're approaching and what you're using. And that's true for any partnerships that you want to build, any connections that you want to create with other communities. If you can show that you've educated yourself about their history, about what they've been through, about their legal troubles, their legal history, what their concerns are, and then that also goes for different substances and medicines. What do you know about the cultural history, the political history, and the safety, the efficacy, all of those different tools that you can arm yourself with information-wise, and just, be doing your due diligence and kind of setting an example for others. Just approaching things with humility, I would say, is a big one. I think a lot of psychedelic experiences can lead you to be a little bit grandiose and maybe lose sight of the grounded reality where you live in community with other people and you depend on other people and you have real material conditions that you need to address and not spiritually bypass. I'm sure it's a trendy phrase now, but it's really true. It's so easy to sort of become disconnected, even though ironically this is like the psychedelics are about finding connection and realizing how interconnected we really are. But the hard work is really in your mundane life, your normal relationships, your normal day-to-day activities. That's, for me, the most psychedelic thing about my experiences now, is just trying to live all of the insights and ways that I've felt a different connection to life in my normal interactions, and that involves being in relationship with family and friends and people who you disagree with, and that's what's going to be necessary if you're ever going to put any pressure on legislators, if you're ever going to change the practices of businesses or of governments. It's going to take collective effort, and it can't just be an individual struggle. And the relieving truth is that we're not alone. We're all supported by other communities and people, not just human beings, but our non-human kin. And this is another thing that if you read a recent paper published in the Lancet journal by several indigenous scholars, they talk about the word psychedelic, and they offer a different word that maybe means a little bit more to their perspective, which is kindelic, or the fact that these substances are not just about your psyche, about your mind, but they actually are a way of manifesting kinship and relationship. And that's I think the key that I would love to give to all of the listeners out there, that it's about relationships, and that's where the work really is.
We're all in this together.
Can I add one more thing?
Go
My
for it.
closing thought would be, I think the reason that we have to be vigilant right now is that futurist Ray Kurzweil says that in 2040, we're going to reach singularity, where your brain's connected to a chip, it has the internet, the cloud, AI running calculations. And he said in 2040, you will be 1 billion times more intelligent than you are now. And that sounds exciting, but it's also very scary, because that means if somebody has breaks up with their significant other and they decide, I'm going to destroy Miami today, they can do it. And I think we have to not wait until 2039 to raise consciousness. We have to do it now. And the way we do it is we just, really encourage people to go inside themselves, use these technologies of nature, and get ahead of this, what's coming with AI and, that singularity. We've got to raise consciousness now. So whatever it takes, do it. And when people tell you, maybe you shouldn't because this or that, when you compare this to people who are committing suicide, addicted, have depression, there's almost no risk in doing this up against that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for being on stage with me. I would love to tell the audience, if they'd like to learn more about the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, to check out Joseph's booth just on the other side of the doors here, and chat with him about that, or have a meeting in the Rodman Law boardroom. So
or contact me, and I'd love you to try the NeuroDirect ketamine, which is our first one, and NeuroDirect psilocybin, and on. But reach out, because you guys are in the first inning of everything. So love it.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.